pretty soon here, everyone. You kind of make your way to the auditorium. This you. Good evening. Thanks so much for coming out. There's plenty of seats in the front.
We're recording and we can only see the front row, so from the camera view. So don't be shy, strangers.
Yeah, we're all friends here. Beautiful. Thank you, Sullivan. Well, I'd like to welcome everyone to the first ever AIA Long Beach South Bay Forum on the Built Environment. We're really excited about the program we have to share with you all tonight. We have two incredibly distinguished special guests with us in Susie Price and Rex Richardson, City Council members, both running for mayor of Long Beach. I'm Casey Chapin. I'm on the board of directors of AIA Long Beach. I'm the current secretary. I'm an architect and project designer at LPA in Irvine and a homeowner in Long Beach. Before we get started tonight, I wanted to take a minute to thank our sponsors. Special thanks to Studio 111 RDC for generously donating the space that we're all in tonight. This really incredible space downtown. I, for one, can't really think of a better place to kind of gather and talk about the built environment in Long Beach. So we're really grateful to have that space tonight. And we'd also want to thank MHP Structural Engineers for all of the snacks and the food and beverages that are in the back here for everybody to enjoy. So thank you, MHP. And I'd also like to thank all of our chapter members who not only have shown up tonight, but also contributed to the program you're about to enjoy. All of the questions that were asked were sort of gathered from our chapter and our committees. So the Committee on the Environment and the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee were both very instrumental in putting together this program. So thank you to both of them. I wanted to take a minute to talk a little bit about AIA Long Beach, although I know many of you are very familiar with the work that we do. AIA Long Beach South Bay is the local voice of the profession. We represent over 300 architects and associate members. We're dedicated to serving and inspiring our members and the public through education, advocacy, and design excellence. And our vision is to drive positive change through the power of design in our community, which is a great theme for what we're going to talk about tonight. Just a note on the format of tonight. So we have a moderator as well, Karina Mills, who I'm sure if any of you are familiar with AIA Long Beach South Bay, you know Karina already, so she needs no introduction, but I'm gonna do my best. Karina began her involvement with our chapter in 2014 when she first joined our board of directors. Her love of the profession, coupled with a tenacious commitment to continuously evolving aspects of it, led Karina to serve as our board president 2 years in a row. Since then, she has served at the state level for AIA California on the executive committee, where she is currently the VP of professional practice. She lives and works in Long Beach and continues to support the local chapter and her firm with a passion for making the profession more inclusive and equitable. She's a graduate of Cal Poly Pomona and a senior associate and senior talent director at RDC Studio 11. So with that, thank you again for your time tonight, and I will turn it over to our moderator, Karina.
Thank you, Casey. And with all of Casey's thank yous, just before I forget, a big thank you to Casey for putting on this program this evening. We're really grateful to all of the organizing. So thank you so much, sir. So I have the pleasure of introducing our candidates, beginning with Susie. A little bit about Susie Price. Susie has served on the Long Beach City Council as the 3rd District Councilwoman since 2014. She was inspired to join local government after she found City Hall unwilling to build a crosswalk in her neighborhood to keep kids safe. As a member of Long Beach City Council, Councilwoman Price has served as chair of the Port, Transportation, the Infrastructure Committee, chair of the Public Safety Committee, and is a member of the Budget Oversight Committee. She's also vice chair for the Los Cerritos Wetlands Authority. Additionally, Councilwoman Price is an honorary board member of the Women's Shelter of Long Beach and on the advisory committee of the Long Beach Ronald McDonald House. Susie has served as Senior Deputy District Attorney for over 20 years, graduating from California State University Long Beach with a Bachelor of Arts degree in Public Science and a Master's degree in Public Policy and Administration. Additionally, during her studies, Susie was active with the Associated Students, Inc., serving as Associate Judas, Senator at Large, and Student Body President. In 1999, Susie graduated from Santa Clara University with a Judas Doctorate degree. Councilwoman Price and her husband, Mark, live in Alamitos Heights with their 2 sons who attend local school, where Susie has been an active member of the Parent Teacher Association. Welcome, Susie. Please join me. And Rex Richardson was elected to Long Beach City Council in 2014 to represent the neighborhoods of North Long Beach in District 9 and serves as Vice Mayor, Chair of the Economic Development Committee, the Chair of the Long Beach Housing Authority as well. Councilmember Richardson's history in Long Beach is grounded in advocating for our most vulnerable residents and empowering communities to have a seat at the table and an opportunity to thrive. Councilmember Richardson championed the creation of Long Beach Office of Equity to help address the economic and health disparities affecting Long Beach neighborhoods and spearheaded a number of innovative initiatives that provide more opportunities to close the gap for our vulnerable populations, including Long Beach Big Brother Keeper Initiative and PATH Young Adult Diversion Program. Representing the 9th District, he has led North Long Beach on a roadmap to its renaissance, by placing a focus on economic and community revitalization with major infrastructure investments like the Michelle Obama Neighborhood Library, Houghton Park Community Center, new retail developments, and Creative Corridor Mural Arts Project. Most recently, Councilmember Richardson launched #EveryoneIn, an initiative designed to create local economy that includes benefits for every Long Beach resident. Rex and his wife, Nina Richardson, are homeowners in North Long Beach, where they reside with their 2 young daughters. Please welcome Rex Richardson. Thank you so much for both being here. So we get to start with a couple of opening statements. There we go. Architects love printed paper. Okay, so we're going to start with some vision statements, and Susie Price gets to go first. With the vision statement, the question here is, what is your vision for the future of the built environment in Long Beach, and what are some initiatives related to architecture that you've overseen as a city council member that you are most proud of?
Thank you. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for giving us an opportunity to come and speak with you. First, let me just start by saying that Rex and I have been on the campaign trail now for about 10 or 11 months, and we've had a lot of forums. And of all the forums that we have had, this one is by far the one that I had the most anxiety about, because the work that you do is very technical in nature. You go to a lot of school to get the education to be able to design spaces for communities like ours that are going to continue to make us prosper and grow. And the expertise that you have is not something that we can teach ourselves in just a few days in preparing for a forum. But I think the most important thing that I want to convey to you tonight is my vision for the built environment in the city of Long Beach involves a lot of collaboration with all of you. I think it's really important for us to acknowledge the things that we have a lot of expertise on, but also acknowledge the expertise that we have available to us as resources in the city with spaces just like this and the men and women who work in a facility like this to help guide us on our path towards progress. And so I'm very fortunate to have had the opportunity to work on several projects for the city of Long Beach that I'm very proud of. I want to just touch on a few of them and tell you how they relate to my vision for the city of Long Beach. So as a third district council person, obviously I've been involved in every single policy that we've adopted as a city, every adaptive reuse project that we've had, every specific plan that we've had, every zoning code that we've had, I've been involved in as a member of the city council. But specifically, I've had the opportunity to be involved in creating a specific plan for Southeast Long Beach, which we had not revitalized and re-updated since the 1970s. And that process involved a tremendous amount of collaboration with people who are experts in the industry, but also with our residents and people in our community who have often the most vocal input in regards to what they want in their spaces. We worked with urban planners, we worked with futurists, we worked with local architects in designing the specific plan so that for the next 30 years or so, we can form decisions about density, walkability, sustainability, and our economy in a way that makes sense for that environment. I've also been very involved in a lot of our adaptive reuse projects and seeing how some of them have been able to thrive, like Emmanuel Place, like the Attic, like Floyd's Barbershop. Those are all in my district, and we've seen how those adaptive reuse projects can work really well. We've also been involved very much with our land use element. The whole city has. For me, my district is incredibly engaged, and they are very vocal about what they want to see in the area of zoning and what they want to see in the areas of open space. And so we've worked a lot on trying to figure out where does density make sense? Where can we create environments that are going to be protecting areas that might be vulnerable to gentrification in certain parts of the district, and really focusing on what things we can do to prevent that from happening. Citywide, in terms of my vision, one of the things I love about the city is the unique nature of every single community that we have in the city. But when you look at our waterfront, and I've had the pleasure and the privilege and the honor to represent much of the waterfront over the last 8 years, we have a lot of opportunity on our waterfront. And I know that we're going through a visioning process now, and I know that's going to lead to great ideas, but we are underutilizing our waterfront tremendously right now. The way that our waterfront is, what we're utilizing the waterfront for right now is frankly embarrassing given the potential that we have as a city. Bringing the university and collaborating with the university to bring the university closer to the waterfront and closer to downtown is something that should be a focus for us, and that's something that I will focus on. Bringing the arts closer to downtown and allowing the waterfront to have a space dedicated to the arts and open space is something that I will definitely promote as the next mayor. Making sure that our areas are first and foremost clean so that we can have walkable environments, clean and safe so that we can have walkable environments is critical. I think a lot of the planning that we do is great, but if people aren't feeling comfortable to walk in those spaces and we're not seeing those corridors activated, then all the beautiful planning that we do is going to go to waste because we're not going to see those areas activated and engaged. And so as mayor, I want to focus on making our city more inclusive in terms of the types of services that we have citywide, decentralizing them a bit so that every part of the city has touches on the arts and touches on the university and touches on the various things that make this city so great. We also have to really think about, we're a port city, we are, but for me, I don't know about any of you, well, you probably didn't have this experience, but it wasn't until I got on to city council that I realized how much of a port city we really were. the port and the port operations really aren't integrated into the city such that there's a culture of us being a port town and us utilizing that and weaving that into our history and into who we are. They're very two separate entities. And you look at a lot of port cities around the world and you see how they're able to integrate the fact that they are a port town with their waterfront and integrate it very seamlessly so that there is this connection that makes the industry aspect of the city also weave in nicely with the urban aspects of the city. And so I envision that we will work together very closely as the next mayor, and that we will have an opportunity, I think, to have more architects really in our planning and development services department, helping and assisting us with those projects. We have sorely been resource burdened with our development services department, and we haven't had any architects really at City Hall to help oversight and to make sure that we have consistency in some of our planning. I mean, some of the projects that you look at, sometimes you just wonder who approved this and how does this fit in with the rest of the landscape around it, and it doesn't. It's almost seems like there's no collaborative effort there to make sure that there's a theme and something that flows nicely. It almost seems like there's a lot of one-offs, and we can do better than that as a city. You know, I think about Second and PCH. That's a huge, tremendous investment in our city in terms of our sales tax revenue and our sales tax base. It's been great. But from an architectural standpoint, it's not really got anything dramatic going on, right? It's a very bland kind of a building. It's great. Again, it's added to our sales tax revenue, but we haven't had that kind of oversight of how do we tie this into the city? How do we make it unique to the city? How do we make the projects unique so that they fit well with one another? So I think for me, the most important thing is going to be that we're going to work together closely and collaborate closely on projects and make sure that at every level we have that dialogue and that openness to talk about what really makes a walkable, engaged, activated city, and how do we do that together. So thank you.
Susie. Next.
All right. Thank you. And thank you, Councilwoman Price. And she's right. We have done this for a long time, a number of these forums. You know why I'm really happy about this forum? It's our last one. So thank you so much for the introduction, the opportunity to come here and speak with you. I believe that cities have responsibility to create a built environment that serves the needs of people. And I have a vision for a built environment that advances equity, that advances sustainability, and a built environment that helps meet those needs that our people need. People move to cities for a reason. All the data shows that people are moving out of rural areas into urban areas, which brings a challenge. How do you make sure that you design and build in a way that it promotes public health? Make sure that parks are 15 minutes away from someone's home because it promotes good activity. Make sure that children can see themselves and they have a need to express themselves. How can children express themselves and need them within the communities that you build and design, whether it's playgrounds or I see some images of murals that come in. Those are great ways to express themselves. We also have a responsibility to address past ills that maybe people in this room had nothing to do with, but it's a reality based on how we live and what we live in. And so a little bit about myself. I represent North Long Beach on the city council. I've served for 8 years. This is a community that was proud working families just like mine. Multiple people in the household working, everyone having a job just like me. My mom had a job, I had a job, my sister had a job, and we all contributed. So you have multiple people working, but it was a community that lacked some basic needs. I'll give you a few examples. The 90805 zip code in Long Beach is a zip code that has 20% of the city's students go to school in this zip code, and 20% of the city's students live in this zip code. But the council district that I represent, which is just larger than half of that zip code, north of South Street, was the only district without a bank and the only district without a library. Kids need libraries to go to school. This was a problem with the built environment. It was an area with some of the least open space. Multiple generations living in homes, so grandma's living at home. It was the only district in the city without a paramedic. 3-minute slow response times in other parts of town. And so those are all associated with the built environment. What we have to do is design alternative systems and models that create better outcomes for people from a public health and a livability standpoint. That's what I've done on the city council. I got really involved. There were not a lot of resources that we had, so I learned how to reach out and get engaged across the region. I'm a bit of a nerd. I literally started my campaign for city council a week after we got back from our honeymoon, me and my wife, and we had no children. And she still reminds me of how we would walk down the street, see a vacant lot and say, hey, wouldn't it be great to have a dog park there? Or see a building and say, wouldn't that be cool if we restored it and brought out those Art Deco themes? Or wouldn't this be a great place for a bank? Those were the conversations we would have. And so when I got on city council, I thrived at the opportunity to work on some of these longstanding issues that have plagued our community for a long time. I got involved in regional planning. I served on the board and served as president of Southern California Association of Governments, the largest metropolitan planning organization in America, representing 6 counties, 191 cities, and 19 million people. In that role, I got hands-on integrated education on some of the biggest issues facing our region. I led the regional housing needs assessment in this recent cycle, allocating 1.3 million units of housing across 6 counties. It was not easy. Some counties, like Orange County, for example, and some of you, I know some of you live in Orange County, understand the circumstances. They were let's say they had a very restrictive posture on housing production. But then you had counties like Riverside and San Bernardino who said, give me as much as you can. But the challenge was the jobs weren't out there, and it wasn't sustainable to say, let's give high requirements out where there isn't access to public transit and there isn't access to jobs. And so working through those challenges, we came up with a transit and jobs mix that prioritized making sure that Los Angeles County and Orange County did their share of housing. And we landed this with a near unanimous vote on RENA. We passed something called the Regional Transportation Plan and Sustainable Community Strategy, the Connect SoCal plan. This is a $624 billion plan that talks about how we design ports, how we design our transportation infrastructure, housing, and sustainability to create a more sustainable region. Why is that important? Long Beach is the 2nd largest city, not in the county, but in the entire SCAG region. We have a port. 43% of all goods come through the United States, come through the combined seaports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. So we have a responsibility to the entire region on how we think about these big, broad issues. Now, in my own community, I learned a lot. We rolled our sleeves up. We went from being the only district, being amongst the only districts for the library, to building the Michelle Obama Neighborhood Library. I worked on this as chief of staff to Councilman Steve Neal, who's here from LPA Architects, right? LPA designed a beautiful library. We went through a lot to make sure that it had the stature and the magnitude and the height to be an iconic sort of structure on the corridor. And it's been transformative, that library. I'm proud of that experience, of what it took to go through a process of designing it, integrated with community, naming it after an icon in the community, and seeing the impact when 5,000 people showed up when we opened that library. We built things like, the Doris Topsy Everett Community Center, took an old community center that, was our only place to meet, expanded it, redesigned it, and now it's the largest, most modern community center that we have in our city, is now Houghton Park, a park that we couldn't go to in the past. The Ron Arias Health Equity Center, which again, we took a space which is an old community, it was an old child care center, adaptively reused it to meet the needs of today. It's the only health equity center in the city. Based on data, we provided programming like, sexual health and awareness, and My Brother's Keeper, My Sister's Keeper. That's how we design and program our environments to meet the needs of the future. And so those are just a few examples. I believe that, the next mayor needs to look at our city. And I don't use this analogy all the time, but I'm using this group. Look at our city like a garden. Here's why. Imagine you build a garden, and in that garden, you place all the things that your community needs. You place, cucumbers and arugula and tomatoes, and you harvest that garden. But then when you're done with that harvest, you walk away from that garden for a year, 2 years. How about 40 years, 50 years, which is the amount of time that some of our communities have gone without investment in Long Beach. And then somebody comes up and says, oh, this is a tomato, arugula, and cucumber garden. I'm going to turn on the faucet. They bring their faucet, but no tomatoes come out. No cucumbers come out. And they say something's wrong with that garden. But But this garden over here is thriving. Let's just move our faucet over here and get what's being planted over here. Next gardener comes and does the same thing. No fruit it's not bearing any fruit. Something's wrong with that garden. And then somebody comes in and says, I see what the problem is. It's no longer a garden. We have to redesign and rebuild a garden in this space. We have to acknowledge the generations of neglect. We have to pull out the weeds and the rodents. What are those? Your nuisance motels, your liquor stores, your check cashing places on every corner. You remove those. And then you plant new seeds based on the needs of the current community. That may be housing. That may be the Michelle Obama Neighborhood Library. That may be open space. That may be workforce and jobs. It depends on the needs of that community. And then you turn on the faucet, and then it will bear fruit. And if you do that, and if you think about this, the work of the mayor is going to be a gardener to really cultivate change, that's when we're going to begin to acknowledge that you don't get 40 years of inequity by accident. It's doing what was being designed to do. And so when we talk about design thinking, I think we have to advance equity. We have to advance sustainability. We have to acknowledge years and generations of systemic disinvestment. And if we do those things, then the rest of our city would thrive. And so you asked my vision for a built environment. I just gave it to you. It's a vision where Long Beach makes the policy decisions and the choices, the land use decisions, outlines the standards, makes the investments to ensure that every part of our community thrives. So I look forward to this conversation. Again, it's a lot of architects and planners here. I know some of you because we've done work together. And if I don't know you, I look forward to meeting you through this process. Thanks a lot.
Thank you both for those opening statements. As Casey mentioned, we did collect some questions from our members. So we're going to flip the order and let Rex answer this question first. Our first question is, our first several questions actually are related to development. And the first question is, the downtown plan envisions Long Beach as a world-class waterfront metropolis. What steps would you take to ensure this goal citywide? What cities would serve as a good precedent for Long Beach?
Sure. So just a few things. I've served the city for 12 years, 4 as the chief of staff and 8 on the city council, half of that time as the city's vice mayor. In that 4 years as chief of staff, I was around for the downtown plan discussion. This was the broad land use plan that added density and set a goal of building 5,000 units downtown. And we've met those goals, but there were some cautionary tales at that moment around gentrification. And there was a discussion in the community that said, hey, we should put community benefits into the downtown plan. 4 things: a project labor agreement with local hire. The second thing was a no net loss policy for units that may be displaced. The third was first right of refusal for tenants. And the fourth was inclusionary housing. Now, there was a split vote back then, and the city council didn't move forward. I think it was a 6-3 vote to not include community benefits. And then we look forward today, a decade later, the 5,000 units were built. We have all of those policies that we were afraid of 10 years ago. We have them in place today. We have a downtown plan. We have inclusionary housing. We have no net loss. All of these policies we have today, but it's a day late and a dollar short for those people who no longer could afford to live in that community. And so I have a vision, and I can tell you a little bit about some of that vision. I think we have an economic necessity to ensure that our entire city can thrive economically. I think it's an economic necessity for us because when the downtown closed down during the pandemic, we had to furlough services. But we didn't just furlough services downtown, we furloughed services across the whole city. That showed that we're interconnected as a city. So we have to be more economically resilient by making sure North, Central, and West Long Beach contribute economically to our city's bottom line. We can't just wait for the areas of town that have always contributed economically because our revenue mix is changing. The end of oil, pending deficits show that we need to broaden our base. So how do we do that? I'll be more specific than my garden analogy. One thing that we did in North Long Beach was, while we were investing ourselves and building libraries and investing in corridors, we also took a good hard look at our land use. We have a plan called UPPLAN, Uptown, this acronym, Uptown Planning, Land Use, and Neighborhood Strategy. This took corridors that hadn't been updated for decades and make sure that they address the current needs of the community, and also did some things like make sure that it encourages positive interaction. Here's what I mean. If you go down Atlantic Avenue today and around 61st, you'll see a CVS. And as you drive north, you see the back of the CVS. And as you pass it, you see the side of the CVS. But at no point do you see the front door or a window. That building is less than 20 years old. That was built in an environment that had no design standards that wanted to encourage positive interaction. Today, that couldn't be built in North Long Beach. We have needs for healthcare services, but the parking standards were so restrictive that we couldn't attract those types of uses to the community. So we changed it, and now we have clinics who are utilizing our new zoning to locate spaces in the community, clinics that serve the needs of our community. So our land use planning had not met the needs of the current community. When you do that and you make it easy to do, you ultimately create an environment where business can happen. And we're seeing that happen right now, where we had Paramount Petroleum was a 75-year-old refinery on Artesia and Paramount. If you go there today, you see a modern industrial building with 600 jobs in there that have, is much cleaner than what was there before, a refinery, but 600 jobs, and the starting wage is around $24 an hour, and they did local hire. And it created a new architectural standard for the industrial space and Artesian Boulevard. So we have to place an emphasis on the planning and the investment, improve our corridors, invest in our corridors, and create a more economically vibrant city. And if we do so, then that will allow us, our whole city, to thrive. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Rex.
Thank you. So just going back to your specific question about the downtown plan and what we would do to ensure that vision and that planning citywide, I think, having gone through the creation of a specific plan for one particular neighborhood, I see and understand the value of having a specific plan that's targeted for a particular neighborhood with specific attributes and factors. And so that's one of the things that I learned a lot during the Southeast Area Specific Plan process. We have within that space the opportunity to build 10% of the city's RHNA requirements in the next 10 to 20 years. 2,300 homes or units will be built in that space along the PCH corridor. But it's also located adjacent to a very sensitive wetlands habitat where the mineral rights are owned by oil companies. So it's a very complex environment to build a specific plan on. And that's why you can't rely on things like the land use element to guide development and progress for the entire city. We have to have specific plans that are tailored to certain neighborhoods. As I go out throughout the city and talk to people about what it is they want in their own communities, obviously, most everybody wants less density. That's for sure, especially in our single family residential neighborhoods. And that's a conversation that we're continuing to have with residents. And of course, introduction of things like ADUs is certainly changing that dynamic quite a bit. But also what people want is a lot of open space. So having a specific plan that carves out more open space out at the outset as part of the zoning is, I think, critical, especially for parts of West Long Beach and Central Long Beach and, of course, North Long Beach. We were able to do that with the Southeast Area Specific Plan. The wetlands are an incredibly sensitive habitat, and as part of an ongoing restoration effort, as chair of the Los Cerritos Wetlands Authority, we entered into a land swap with one of the oil operators who operates at that site so that we would give them 8 acres of publicly owned land in exchange for 156 acres of wetlands that would be restored over time, so that someday it is the hope that they will be analogous to the Bolsa Chica wetlands. I think even better, because we have the benefit of saltwater intrusion in our wetlands and we can have a magnificent habitat, but it's going to take some time. But what we did that I would like to, talk about why it's important to have a specific plan is we outlined areas that were previously zoned for residential or commercial or industrial that were sitting immediately adjacent to the wetlands. And we determined that those areas are never going to be built for commercial, industrial, or housing because they're so close to the wetlands that the permits would never be approved either through the city or through the Coastal Commission. And so we had conversations with those property owners and said, we're going to be rezoning these areas to create more open space, because every few years there's a threat that there's going to be a residential development built right around the wetlands. And we know that that's just not feasible based on the environment. So what we did is we just rezoned it, and we took a risk that we would get sued as a city by rezoning and making that open space. But it was a calculated risk that was done with a lot of informed decision making regarding what the feasibility of building on those sites would be, considering where they're located. So I think having specific plans like we do in downtown Long Beach is important for us to do citywide. For a lot of cities, open space is huge, but also the opportunity to further develop their business corridors is huge. And it's something that they would like us to re-envision those areas for, and think about additional density where that makes sense in some of those business corridors where mixed use developments make sense. We also have to reevaluate our downtown plan. A lot has changed. I mean, I know that Studio 111, the very site we're sitting in today, was at the lead on the visioning for that process, and that was great. But so much has changed since we adopted the downtown plan. Work habits and work locations have changed as a result of the pandemic. And now we have a lot of open space in downtown that has led to lack of engagement and activation in the streets, and led to a lot of concerns with people that do have to come here to go to work in terms of activation and walkability. And so we have to re-envision it. And then the other thing that I would say as part of your question is, you know, what cities would you look at citywide or around the nation, around the world as examples? You know, I really would start by looking at port towns. You know, we look at port towns that have done tremendous job of marrying the industrial with the urban aspects of the city, creating open spaces that provide recreation and sustainability. And, you know, port towns all over the world that provide a really great source of inspiration for us. Port towns all over struggle with how to do this well. You know, we want to look at cities like Boston and Sydney, and cities that have managed to build their urban environments with bold architecture while still maintaining and preserving the charm of the individual neighborhoods that I think is so unique to the city of Long Beach. And so, you know, I look forward to that process, and I look forward to creating what we have in the downtown plan specifically for all the different neighborhoods in the city of Long Beach, because I think a lot of neighborhoods feel neglected, honestly, in the city of Long Beach, because they're lumped in with the land use element, but yet they might have specific needs like more open space that really would benefit from a very focused outlook and planning for those particular neighborhoods, as opposed to just some generalities with zoning and density as it relates to a transit corridor per se.
Thank you, Susie. So moving on to our next development question, and we'll have Susie answer this one first. The city has an incredible volume of existing buildings. How can we best promote sustainable retrofit and reuse? And what lessons can we learn from properties such as Community Hospital and the Queen Mary?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I love our adaptive reuse projects. I think they present a tremendous opportunity to rehab existing buildings. They fit nicely within existing neighborhoods. They actually are a prevention in some ways of gentrification if they're done correctly. And we have several of them in my district that I've represented for 8 years now. Emmanuel Place is a classic example of an adaptive reuse building that really has turned into a fantastic asset for the city. And of course, the attic. I mean, who doesn't love the attic? It used to be a home. Floyd's Barbershop sitting right at that corner there, just from the height and the look and everything fits so perfectly there. And instead, it could have been something very different had we not supported and incentivized adaptive reuse. So I very much believe that we should incentivize adaptive reuse. In addition to that, I think, you know, you think about things like the Queen Mary and Community Hospital. You know, my husband used to work for a company that was owned by a Japanese firm. The parent company was a Japanese firm. And when they would present themselves or find themselves with a problem, they would have kaizans. That's what they called them. They would get together and they would have a planning meeting. And I think you have a similar thing in your industry with your technical assistance panels, where you will tackle an issue and talk about, bring together stakeholders and bring together experts to really have, you know, a kaizen on this particular issue. We definitely need to do that for the Queen Mary. That is essential. Now, I know that in the past we've had these long committees that have talked about how can this be used this way? How can that be used that way? What can we do? And we've had these beautiful plans and these beautiful visions. But the reality is the Queen Mary has been neglected for decades. And frankly, the operators of the Queen Mary asset have looted it for years at the expense of the city of Long Beach. And that's just a reality. I know everybody doesn't want to hear that, but that's where we are now. We have this beautiful asset that is now potentially a $500 million liability. And it has been unfairly placed at the feet of the port to deal with what to do with. But I think that as mayor, we would have a Kaizen and we would bring together experts from the hotel industry, architects, experts from the business industry, and we would have a brainstorming session with some technical assistance panels on what can be done there, if anything. Community hospital is a different issue. Community hospital, I think, is on the path to hopefully being a use that is going to be very beneficial for the city of Long Beach. My hope for community hospital is that it will be transformed into a similar use that they have in Orange County with the Be Well campus. I don't know how many of you guys have seen the Be Well campus. If you haven't had an opportunity to tour it, you should. I spend a lot of time at the Be Well campus with my day job. They have on-site residential housing for mental health issues and substance abuse issues. They also have acute care mental health residential, which is a shorter term stay, and medical detox. And the facility is run beautifully. Now, that is in an industrial area, which is different in some ways than community hospital, but community hospital has the potential to really, in its current architecture and form, be used as a space that is very much needed as a service for the city of Long Beach. And so I think using that building to continue having it as a medical facility is the primary goal of the city. But if we have any sort of residential component to it, very limited with that site because of the earthquake fault, very limited on what can be done. But as long as it stays a medical use, I think there's a lot of potential to serve the city well without too much restoration or rehab of the site.
Thank you, Susie. And Rex?
Thank you so much. And I agree, the city does have a great volume of buildings with great character. And I think we've moved most recently into adaptive reuse and sustainable retrofit of buildings. Just give an example. I mentioned earlier the Ron Arias Health Equity Center. That was an underutilized childcare center that sat vacant. And it, the building, the history was that back when the federal government built HUD facilities to go and do sort of housing and HUD and outreach in communities, Long Beach received 3 facilities. And when the federal government got out of it, Long Beach managed some of those. And then we got into a model where we just contracted it out to whatever nonprofit. And over time, the building degraded. And so we looked at sustainability funds, we retrofitted it, we adaptively reused that building. And now it has, again, it has a clinic on the inside, a public health clinic. It has the new Office of Youth Development is there. The Latino Health Access work is run out of there. We have a youth workforce center right next to Jordan High School that's offering opportunities to youth. The violence prevention work is anchored there. So it's actually meeting a use and being adaptively reused. That's a great example. My field office, I'm one council member. I'm the only council member that works out of a fire station like the Ghostbusters. Why? Well, I remember when I first took office, we had just built the new Fire Station 12. My predecessor did that, and the firefighters moved into the new building. It's a haunted building. They left the ghost in the old building. But I remember Amy Bodek, our planning director at the time, said, "Okay, council member, we're putting it up. We're going to sell the building. It might turn into a duplex, and that's fine." But the community really wanted to continue to use it as a public use. But it had ADA issues. There were wires hanging all over the place, all sorts of radios and all sorts of things. And we leaned into it and said, we're going to adaptively reuse this facility. If you go there today, they call it Firehouse Community Farm. It has a UCLA Master Gardeners program where we do classes out of a tomato farm on the side. There's an orchard in the back. In the front is a Xeriscape guard, and we partner with Leadership Long Beach to do it. It's my field office, so our field rep works out of there. And during the pandemic, it served as a food distribution hub. Now, why is that important? This building was built in 1925. During the industrial war effort, it served as a women's sewing factory. It was not preserved as a historic landmark. We went through that process, and now it is. And that's an important asset in our North Long Beach community, but to our whole community. Now, North Long Beach is an area where we just got our first historic district. You know, many of the areas outside of sort of, as you get away from the city, sort of Wilmore and those areas, they're newer. Like these homes were built in the 50s and the 60s, some of these cities. And they're just now getting to the age where they're able to be designated as a historic landmark, right? And we have significantly fewer landmarks that are preserved in these areas. And so the city does have a role to look at both historic preservation, adaptive reuse, and our cultural context on how we value what is relevant from a historic standpoint. Now, the question about additional facilities, I think there are tremendous opportunities. I think the Armory is a tremendous opportunity for adaptive reuse. The city just acquired the old Edison building. We're moving some of our police labs into that building. We're also moving our senior center downtown into that building. And so I think that's a great example of adaptive reuse in the old Edison building. And what have we learned from things like Community Hospital and the Queen Mary? I'll say on Community Hospital, what I learned personally, you know, Community Hospital, it's not in my district. I support it, trying to save the trauma unit because it made sense, because we're a part of the same system. If one trauma unit, if one trauma center, if one ER goes down, it affects all of our entire system in the area. So it made sense. But if we looked at the data back then and what the data was telling us, the data told us back then our biggest need was mental health services. And today it's moving forward to become a mental health facility. But if we acknowledged the data back then, we would have saved significant amount of money as a city, taxpayer dollars. And so you asked what I've learned. I've learned that we really have to trust and follow the data, and that government should design systems and make investments based on current community need. Now on the Queen Mary, you know, I think the decision on the Queen Mary is going to sort of decide itself, because the price tag to eliminate the Queen Mary is bigger than people think, 150 to 250 million bucks, right? To sink it out and turn it into a reef or recycle it and all of those things. But the way that I look at it, the decisions will ultimately be made. We need to protect, you know, taxpayer liability and protect taxpayers. But here's the way I sort of look at it. Imagine your great grandfather bought a home, built a home, and, you know, and let's say it's in California and it's hot and that home got termites and he didn't keep up with some of the maintenance, and then he passes on to the next generation and they weren't too good at it either. And it passed on to the next generation and the neighbors are just fed up. Then it passes on to your generation and the neighbors show up and say, okay, you know what to do, burn it down. Well, I wouldn't burn it down. I'm going to take a look at it as an asset and see how you, number one, try to preserve, you know, our investment, try to at least get a return on your investment, do an analysis on what it will cost to make real decisions about it, and make the most prudent decision about the future of that building. And it likely won't be to burn down. That's the way I see it as a leader in the city. I'm going to make a real decision based on the real costs, and we're going to work together with our preservation community and ensure that the life of the Queen Mary is extended in a way that it creates more economic opportunity, that we can leverage those economic opportunities, whether it's cruise ship terminals or development around the Queen Mary, to leverage those resources in order to pay the cost to restore the Queen Mary, because there's no longer a ship. The Queen Mary it's the Eiffel Tower. The Eiffel Tower was not designed to last for more than 7 years, but it's lasted because they made the investments to retrofit it and turn it into a historic landmark, which is what the Queen Mary is. So it can function as a hotel. It can function and have some economic life, but it has to come out of the water and it needs to be preserved. And we need to do so in a way that makes sense economically and is fiscally prudent. So those are the things that I've learned, and thanks so much.
Thank you, Rex. Okay, moving on to the topic of housing. As architects, we have a lot of ideas about how to address housing insecurity, whether building permanent housing, tiny homes, or campgrounds with services. Many other cities in our region have had successful pilots using these strategies. What would you build to house the unhoused in Long Beach? Rex?
So I think it's first, we have to acknowledge that we are in an unprecedented housing crisis. So we're going to need to explore all of it. Every option needs to be on the table to address the crisis. We can't, say that homelessness or housing is a crisis, but we're not going to look at certain opportunities to address that crisis. I think when we think about things like ADUs and tiny homes, we have a policy now, and state law has a policy that's streamlines and offers this opportunity, but that wasn't our posture forever. We had a very restrictive garage conversion policy, and it didn't work because when I bought my first home in North Long Beach when I was 25, every garage was converted. So it clearly didn't work, but we saw the costs of that restrictive policymaking. There were 3 young girls, the Viles sisters, who died in the illegal garage conversion. That caught fire. That was when we had restrictive policies. Now, those girls and that family, they didn't live in the garage out because they wanted to. It was economic necessity. That economic necessity exists today. So when we think about housing and we think about shelter, it's not about what's good to have. It's not about preventing growth from happening or density from happening, because growth is going to happen. That's just demographics. The question is it going to happen in a way that is haphazard, where multiple families are overcrowded in homes, where you have substandard living in illegal dwellings, or is it going to happen in a way that is safe and healthy, which is our responsibility as government to provide? So we have to acknowledge that our policies have to be more open and flexible to being creative and following the trends of what people will already do. People were already converting to ADUs in a way that was illegal. And so as mayor, we have to have a policy that looks at everything. Everything has to be on the table. We have to prioritize civil liberties. We have to prioritize sustainability, adaptive reuse, and maximize the opportunities that we have. So I believe that everything has to be on the table to address the housing crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Rex. And Susie?
Thank you. So the city of Long Beach has taken great strides to allow for multiple different types of proposals in terms of additional housing. Right now, 40% of our affordable housing stock comes from accessory dwelling units. And they're great because they allow different price points for everyone. Not everyone, but different price points for some variety in terms of people getting access to housing in the city of Long Beach. But we've also adopted a proposal to expand our tiny home project. So we're going to be able to have some tiny homes in the city of Long Beach. And we have, as a council, really taken on the challenge of bringing homeless and transitional housing to every district. Every single district has embraced the opportunity to transition some facilities to transitional housing. I'll say we had an experience like that in the 3rd district. A lot of times people are very scared when they hear that there's going to be transitional homeless housing in their neighborhood. And the number one challenge is trying to get the neighborhood to understand that the impacts to their quality of life are going to be minimal, and guaranteeing them that requires that they have a leader they trust and with whom they have some credibility. I see some of my neighbors in here, and I can tell you when we were going to be planning to have a motel transitional housing right across the street practically from my neighborhood, there was a lot of concerns about what was that going to mean for quality of life. And so what we did is we worked really closely with the operators. We made sure that there were rules in place that would minimize any impacts to quality of life. And as a result, that facility has transitioned over 100 people to permanent supportive housing in just 2 years. And that's been a fantastic asset. So telling success stories like that to communities that are looking at hotel or motel conversions, that these are projects that work and help get people who are ready to get off the street transitional housing is really important. And I think as a city, we need to make sure that we are doing that very, very well. I served as a city attorney for a little while. I was a DA in the Ventura County DA's office. And then I worked at a municipal law firm where I did city attorney work for a number of years. And then I went to the Orange County DA's office. And when I was a city attorney, I represented 17 cities in Southern California as their contract city attorney. So these are cities that didn't have their own city attorneys. And we did a lot of code enforcement work and saw a lot of examples of people trying to build affordable housing without going through the process because it's so much cheaper to do. And it created a lot of code enforcement issues, as you can imagine. And so I think trying to partner with people who own property in the city of Long Beach and incentivize them to work with the city to create affordable housing within existing structures and be able to utilize some of the existing housing that we have to convert that to affordable housing would be a really a great place for us to start. Let me tell you what I mean by that. We have landlords in the city of Long Beach, small mom and pop landlords that own tens of thousands of rental units in the city of Long Beach. And because they've had a bad experience with the city in the past, they're very, very reluctant to accept housing vouchers or people who need affordable housing or even workforce housing that's going to be subsidized by the city. They simply do not want to take the risk that they're going to be held holding the bag. And so there's a lot of affordable housing opportunities out there right now with our existing housing stock. If we can just incentivize and get the landlords to want to work with the city and partner with the city. We have 500 people on the streets right now with housing vouchers. And it's going to take those landlords that have the existing housing stock to be willing to trust the city, to work closely with the city to accept those vouchers. 500 housing vouchers when we have hundreds of thousands of rentals in the city of Long Beach is definitely doable if we partner better with our landlords. I mean, just in the last couple of weeks, I personally have been involved in placing 2 people with vouchers into apartments that landlords were hesitant to accept Section 8 or other vouchers, and now they're willing to do it. So I think we have to look at every option for sure, but I also think we need to get engaged and work with our existing housing stock, because it's not just about building more affordable housing. Building more affordable housing is definitely important, but we're talking 3 to 5 years out, and we have a crisis going on right now that we need to solve. We cannot let people continue to live in a way that's not compassionate for them or for the residents. We have to do everything we can to offer services to get people connected to transitional housing, even if that means transitional housing that's provided by nonprofits. Our nonprofits offer a lot of group home affordable housing that is meant to address our unhoused communities. We don't partner well enough with them, and we should. And so by partnering with our nonprofits, by partnering with the landlords, and by continuing to approve ADUs that are within the code guidelines, I think that's a really good step in the right direction. The motel conversions and tiny homes have been key and have provided a lot more capacity for the city, and we need to continue to incentivize those. But we cannot, if we don't address getting people off the street to begin with through street outreach and getting them to accept a service, then we're going to have a public safety crisis and a public health crisis that's going to be uncontrollable.
Thank you, Susie. So our next question is on gentrification, which is a looming issue in the city, and many low-income communities of color are currently at risk. The situation is contrary to the principles outlined in the framework for reconciliation that the City Council adopted in 2020. As mayor, will you support anti-gentrification measures and policies that protect and uplift these neighborhoods and communities?
So absolutely. I mean, I'm a lawyer, so I'm going to say it depends on the policy, right? Not every policy is going to have the intended consequence. But I think when we're talking about gentrification, it's really important for us to try to get ahead of the issue to the best of our ability. There are certain communities and neighborhoods that are absolutely vulnerable for gentrification, whether it's their access to transit corridors, whether it's the nature of the community. They are very vulnerable to gentrification. So I think it's important for us to think about those particular communities and what we're doing in terms of our zoning and what we're doing in terms of the incentives that we offer. There are many, many cities that have looked at this issue. Boston, for example, has done some really innovative things with preventing gentrification. Things like property tax, either delays or reductions to keep people in their homes so that they're not selling and being bought out to someone who's going to tear down the property and rebuild it. Incentivizing people to stay in their homes and keep their homes. That's one aspect of gentrification or preventing gentrification that we have talked about. We've also seen cities support residential groups that have pooled their resources together to purchase properties in areas that are vulnerable to gentrification. We've seen landlords, small mom and pop landlords who are looking to sell and move on. They're done. They want to retire and enjoy life. getting those folks to perhaps consider selling to their tenants, creating agreements with their tenants where they would pool their resources to buy that asset so that it doesn't get taken over by a larger developer who's going to tear it down and contribute to gentrification issues. So I think it's very important for us to think about gentrification from a move forward standpoint. What are the areas that are most vulnerable? What kind of mixed developments can we apply to those particular communities to prevent gentrification from happening? And more specifically, how can we promote more workforce housing in those communities? The lack of workforce housing, I think, is contributing to a lot of our gentrification issues because people who are, working are not able to buy or even afford rents in their neighborhoods. And the neighborhoods that are most vulnerable to gentrification are having to push those people out. And we want to make sure that we have workforce housing and we're incentivizing workforce housing in those communities and partnering with developers to incentivize those programs by streamlining the process for those specific projects, reducing costs for those specific projects, perhaps waiving some of the regulations that they would otherwise have to go through for a market rate project for a workforce or low-income projects. I think those are all guaranteeing loans for developers that are building workforce and low-income housing. I think those are all things that many cities have done and that we should be looking at more aggressively doing in the city of Long Beach.
Thank you, Susie and Rex.
Thank you. Just a few thoughts. Important topic, and it's something that Long Beach as a city is particularly vulnerable to gentrification. And gentrification is when values are driven down and resources are starved out of a community. And once that happens, you can acquire property at a cheaper rate and change the character of the community and change the actual makeup of the community, people who actually lives there, and create more economic value for a new community. And that's what we've seen happen in Long Beach. And that was just a small tease of what can happen unless we truly embrace economic inclusion and truly set a new standard where every part of our city has to have what they need to thrive. We're not talking about, Apple stores. We're talking about grocery stores, right? We're talking about what we need to be able to live a healthy life. Now, I think from a policy standpoint, there are some good examples. We made some good progress here recently. I told the story earlier, so I won't tell it again about what we didn't do with the downtown plan, but there's hope. No net loss policy does exist today. Our first right of refusal, it exists. All of these were adopted as a part of our larger package around inclusionary housing. Our inclusionary housing policy is, there are definitely some areas where we can improve. It's largely two zones. One zone is downtown and midtown. That requires 11% of the housing units that are built to be targeted at very low income. Well, that's because the economic studies showed that the density bonuses that are already built into the downtown and midtown plans would help offset that economic cost. But outside of those areas, you will not see affordable housing be built unless it's in an area where you have premium sort of real estate. I'll give you an example. Shoreline Gateway, beautiful building, tallest building downtown. The units are $11,000 a month. So the average person in Long Beach can't afford that. You can't produce affordable housing and put in mechanisms that prevent gentrification without investing in it. It costs money to subsidize public housing. Now, Long Beach had done that for decades as a part of redevelopment. And all of you know that 20% of every redevelopment dollar had to be preserved for affordable housing, set aside for affordable housing preservation or production. In Long Beach, that was between $20 and $30 million a year. You also know that from site acquisition to the environmental process, to design and review and entitlements and construction, an affordable housing project could take 4 to 5 years. Redevelopment ended in FY 2012, FY 2012 budget, it went into effect FY 2013. 5 years after that, Governor Newsom announced the housing crisis. 1 + 1 = 2. You put 5 years on top of 2013, you end up in 2018. So a big part of this is that we're not investing financially into affordable housing. Now, cities, we're the great facilitators. We're the ones who can do it. We can't do it without the resources to do so. In Long Beach, we did a process called Everyone Home that outlined what we needed in order to keep pace for about 10 years, to catch up from the 10 years, roughly 10 years that we were falling behind. The number was about $250 million. It's not a huge number when you think about it, but we have to be creative about how we actually come up with those resources and invest in housing so that you can invest in development, because development is good. Building the first bank in a community that didn't have it is a good thing, right? Building grocery stores in a community is a good thing, but you have to protect the housing and invest in housing. So here are some ideas. I have a proposal on my platform and within my HOPE plan, that's my housing plan, called the Long Beach Housing Promise. Sounds a lot like the Long Beach College Promise because it's very similar. It's a partnership with our educational institutions and our largest industries in Long Beach to produce housing. Imagine if the school district, as it's setting aside resources to update its facilities and to put HVAC in because it's hot and the climate is getting hotter. As they do that, they set aside a portion of their bond funds or their proceeds to building housing and partnering with the city on housing for families, for students on free and reduced lunch, K through 12. Imagine what happens to that student's family. You're talking about better educational outcomes. You're talking about better graduation rates because there's a direct correlation to academic performance and housing instability. That's where the data comes in. So that's one example of the Long Beach Housing Promise. You can do this with the community college. You can do this with Long Beach State. You can also partner with our biggest industries. We're a big city on education and healthcare. Where are our partnerships on actually building housing and partnering with our hospital, our healthcare community on housing production? We did a study back in 2017 that showed that housing, people are buying homes in the city. We have no problem with that. But what the study showed was that the people who were buying those homes didn't make they had a significantly higher income than those who lived in that community prior to they bought the existing community. It also showed that existing renters were not able to afford the homes in the neighborhoods they lived in. So what can local governments do about that? Local governments can invest in down payment assistance. Data shows that's the most significant barrier because it's not financing. You can get non-bank lenders can approve financing for 620, 630 credit score. It's about the down payment. Long Beach used to invest in down payment assistance. That's something we can do right now to give existing renters an opportunity to do home ownership. We're not just talking about it, we're actually doing it. In our recovery plan, we invested $3 million to restart our down payment assistance fund to provide up to $25,000 in down payment assistance for existing renters to transition into homeowners. So these are the ways that the city should think about not only policy, not only the way that policy like inclusionary housing and no net loss, not only how policies can impact people's lives, but how programs can impact people's lives. Because again, we have a responsibility to facilitate good interactions with people. And what that means in our built environment, and that means sometimes it means that we have to make investments in building communities with mixed income and other things that can cultivate good relations in our community. Thanks.
Thank you, Rex. I think we probably are getting close to just having time for one more question. So I'm going to jump ahead to a question on the environment because we do want to discuss that. So I'm going to preface with the low-income communities are experiencing the greatest impact of climate emergency, including extreme heat, lack of shade, environmental pollution, and poor air quality. Jumping to the question, with the approved Long Beach Climate Action and Adaptation Plan by the City Council in August of just this year, what steps do you feel are most important to help the city stay on track with its climate goals and targets? And is there something specific or a target that should be our first step or top priority? Rex?
All right, so we get this question a lot. So I'll kind of go through this one. So it's hot. We know that it's hot. Climate, the impacts of our climate are manifesting in a number of ways. And two ways are probably the most pronounced. I'd say there are three ways, but two ways are the most pronounced. One, we know that sea level rise is real. We just experienced an emergency in our peninsula. And, we care for those residents and they're a part of our city as well. But also extreme heat, urban heat island effect. The council district I represent is the furthest from the ocean. And so most days out of the summer, we're about 10 degrees hotter. And we didn't anticipate that when we built our parks and built our infrastructure. Our district is about 1/10 of the open space as, let's say, the 5th district, 1/10. So our infrastructure isn't built from a climate friendly standpoint. There was a situation a couple years ago. It was some young Latino Black kids over by Ramona Park neighborhood who hopped a fence to go swimming in a private pool during the summer. And the cops were called. It became a big situation on social media. But when I looked at it, I thought, how many fences did I hop when I was a kid to go swimming, right? The answer wasn't to build a better fence. The answer was to build the kids a pool, a public pool they have access to. To me, that's climate-friendly infrastructure. Thinking about investments we need for people for the environment to be livable. And so when we look at the infrastructure that we have today, we have many of our schools whose HVAC doesn't work. That's why we're investing in that right now. The school district has a measure on the ballot right now to invest in that. We have cooling centers where HVAC didn't work completely in some of the hottest areas of town. That requires money. We invested in some of that with Measure A. So we have a climate action adaptation plan, and it talks about making major investments into resilience and climate-friendly infrastructure, but it's insufficiently funded. That's the reality. Now, there are things that we can do, and we're beginning to take some tiny steps to invest in that climate-friendly infrastructure. One was in 2020, our city council, and I led this effort to place a ballot on the measure called a measure on the ballot, not ballot on the measure. It was called Measure US, the Yes on Us campaign. It was a tax on oil that's produced in our city, which is going to decline over time, to invest in youth, public health, and accelerating our climate action adaptation plan. It doesn't generate a whole bunch of money, about $1.6 million a year, but it's funding things that we had no funding for previously, or very little funding for previously. Our climate action adaptation plan is a commitment. There are strategies there that were going to be difficult to implement without resources and without commitment. It's an aspirational document. We commit to being carbon neutral 5 years ahead of Los Angeles. That's incredibly important. But we need to know there will be some difficult decisions on hand. I'll just give an example. The end of oil. Long Beach is an oil providence. We know that. Anybody here seen the movie There Will Be Blood with Daniel Day-Lewis? It's one of my favorites. I see some heads shaking, right? I will drink your milkshake. Favorite parts, one of the favorite parts. But basically, those guys were from Signal Hill. That showed a little bit of what Long Beach's history was. So we're an oil providence. We're one of the few jurisdictions in America that's an oil company. Now, oil is our past. That's true. But it's very clear that oil is not our future. And that prospect means that we have to be ready to have the difficult conversations about the lease agreements and the license agreements and how to wind those down, the revenue deficit that it will create, because we balance our budget based on uplands and tightlands funds. A lot of the infrastructure in the coastal areas are tightlands funds, and we're going to have some very difficult conversations about expectations. We may not be able to maintain the same level of quality that we've had in those areas without really thinking big. Now, here's an idea. How about we have a broader conversation with other cities that are in the same circumstance with the government, Long Beach, with the state government. Long Beach is one of the top 10 cities in California. We're a part of a group called the Big City Mayors, who convene with the legislature in leadership and with the governor to talk about bigger issues. Here's one that will help us get off of oil and become more resilient. The tax code. Our tax code right now says that we generate our revenue based on sales tax and property tax, and that's our bread and butter. That encourages us to build shopping malls and car dealerships. That's what we're incentivized to do, not to build housing or to have a more progressive tax code that moves us away from oil. So how about we talk about a more progressive tax code that looks at, strategies to move us away from oil or not be so dependent on oil, create some sort of a buffer while we build up our revenue mix again. How about we look at things like incentivizing cities by providing a portion of the income tax? That would directly incentivize cities to value people, not only on building housing for those people, but also making sure they have good living wage jobs. By doing so, you will create a shift in the way local government thinks about what we prioritize. That will permeate through our land use, our planning, so that we can prioritize cities that are built on the concept of helping people thrive. So those are just some ideas on what we need to do. What I would do as mayor, I would convene a committee of 100, because I consider this one of the most significant challenges facing our city over the next decade, is how we move away from oil, implement our climate action adaptation plan. And so you're going to see that we're going to need to bring some of our best thinkers together on this challenge, because this is a big citywide challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, Rex and Susie.
Thank you. So I'm going to go back to what I think the question was, in terms of our response to extreme heat, lack of shade trees. Is that the question we're on? I see. Okay, great. So we did adopt the Climate Action Adaptation Plan, and the port, of course, adopted theirs in 2005. And we're very involved in sea level rise issues. For those of us that represent the coastal zone, obviously the sea level rise issues have presented the most imminent emergency for us in terms of us having a narrowing beach. Really, what in the city of Long Beach, we're one of the only coastal cities that doesn't lose sand due to wave activity. We move sand. We move sand from the east to the west, and every day we have trucks that bring the sand back, multiple trucks all day long that are operating to build a berm and build out the beach. And so investing in equipment and technology that'll help us prolong the impacts of sea level rise is going to be critical. We already did purchase some hydraulic pumps that we put to use on a pilot project that did not work out as intended, but we still have that infrastructure. So we're going to use that and use those pipes in a different way, laying them over the water as opposed to under the sand, which is what we had done last time. But the issue, I think, in terms of the Climate Action Adaptation Plan is that there are short, mid, and long-term goals that we as a city have to make sure that we're immediately embarking on. In terms of our short-term goals, the single most attainable goal is planting more trees in areas that are tree poor and open space poor. The amount of benefit that will come from planting more trees is huge. It is 40 degrees less hot under a tree than it is standing in the middle of a street. And there are so many trees that are getting removed every year when we have new developments that are not getting replaced at that same pace. And so we have to make sure that we're creating these urban forests and developing trees everywhere that we can, especially in lower income communities that generally have higher temperature rates and don't have sufficient trees in open space. So that's going to be really important. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal a few years back, or it may have been the New York Times, that talked about the importance not just of planting more trees for this specific issue as short-term immediate goals, but also the specific types of paint that are used. Our darker surfaces, for example, and lack of trees are what attributes to the heat islands. And there are paints now that are being used by builders that really repel the sun and create an environment that is just as cool as air conditioning in some circumstances, just by the paint that is used on the surface. It's a lighter color paint, of course, but also the paint has a texture and a mixture that repels heat. And that is something that is being utilized to combat the climate change and extreme heat environments that the city of Long Beach should, in my opinion, start to mandate for new buildings. We also need to think about what we're doing to make sure as we move forward that we're creating infrastructure in the city for more electrification, so that when we're moving towards transitioning towards more electric vehicles and more electrical vehicles and trucks at the port operations, that we have that infrastructure in place. So collaborating with our partners to build that additional EV infrastructure is going to be critical for the city of Long Beach. And that is a short-term goal that we need to be focused on right now. And that's something that's not going to cost too much money for the city, because we're going to be able to partner with private sector to be able to build that infrastructure. And that's something that we should be doing more aggressively. I've been the chair of the Alamitos Corridor Transportation Authority for a number of years. One of the things we've talked about is so much of our environmental crisis right now is related to port activity. The port activity, in addition to climate change, is creating an environment that's pretty dire at this time. And so we've talked for years about creating the infrastructure so that we have short haul rail. Right now, every container that's put onto a train out of the Port of Long Beach is going out of state. We don't have anything that's going to Bakersfield or having a short haul rail that takes trucks off the road and instead puts rail to use. That's an infrastructure that we need to invest in. Again, something that we can start to invest in immediately as a short-term goal that will produce long-term huge benefits down the road. So we have to first look at our short-term goals. And of course, with our mid and longer-term goals, the funding may not be there. But again, so many of our goals are reliant upon us working with industry partners. So many of our goals, our climate action goals, really rely on partnerships. These are not things that the city is going to do alone. These are partnerships with developers. These are partnerships with utilities. These are partnerships with oil. everything that we're doing requires partnerships in terms of our climate adaptation plan. And when we think about what we need to do, first and foremost, I think we have to start with our low-hanging fruit, which is the short-term implementation of urban forests and creating new design standards that are going to help us with extreme heat moving forward. And I agree. I am in favor of pools in every district in the city. We should have them. And I think hopefully that's a priority for every council member. You know, what happens sometimes is people, we have limited resources and people pick priorities of what they want for their communities. And sometimes the pool's not at the top of the priority. But the good thing for us is Long Beach Unified is building some new pools. And we have great joint use agreements with Long Beach Unified on a lot of the spaces that they have and the spaces that we have. Blair Field is a classic example of a joint use agreement that we have with Cal State Long Beach. It's our asset, but they use it for their baseball team. We can have those joint use agreements where we have those pools accessible. Right now, the only public pools that we have permanent the only permanent pools we have in the city of Long Beach are in areas that experience the worst of extreme heat, which is good. We have the only public pools we have are in those areas, but we should definitely build more. But again, we have a lot of communities that are elderly. Maybe they're not looking to jump in a pool. They just need to be able to go on a walk and not experience the tremendous heat that they have in their communities. And we do that by building urban forests.
Thank you so much, Susie and Rex. I think that concludes our questions for the evening. Thanks to our audience for being here. Okay, we're going to turn it over to Casey to close us out for the evening.
Thanks, Karina. How about a round of applause for Karina and Councilwoman Susie Price, Vice Mayor Rex Richardson. Yeah, thank you all for coming out on behalf of AIA Long Beach South Bay. I think it was a great event. We really appreciate the time spent from both of you, and congratulations on making it to the last of the forums. Just in closing, I want to remind everyone here to make sure you vote if you haven't already voted. November 8th, a big election, not just in Long Beach, but statewide. So please, encourage your family, friends, and neighbors to vote as well. And thank you again for coming out.